The next speaker is Julia Maurer. She's leading the LZ help desk at the SIB Personal Health Informatics Initiative Group, and she's responsible for the national data sharing frameworks of the SPHN. From personal experience, I can, out of the Swiss BioRef project, say that setting up a consortium agreement, for example, is a huge work. And we already used the help of Julia, and it is a great experience, especially if you are not familiar with the legal documents. You're literally lost, and it's a great pleasure to have you here to present what you're doing. And I'm really curious to see all the possibilities to facilitate and simplify all the document stuff about data sharing. Stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Alex, for this nice introduction. Can you hear me well? And you see also my slides?
Yes, both okay.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present you our vision of a responsible data sharing in the Swiss research community. And I will focus today on the legal framework proposed by the Swiss Personalized Health Network, and will present you current documents and standards we have been able to establish so far. And at the very end, I'm happy to share some future ideas and ongoing activities which might help us to overcome certain bottlenecks we are confronted with when we are supposed to share health-related data in Switzerland. And so while talking about bottlenecks, that gives me a great opportunity to show you this paper. So this paper is basing on a systematic analysis of open data studies, and the authors have revealed here 11 categories showing drivers and inhibitors when sharing and using data, not necessarily open data. So one category focuses on social influence affiliation, and so this category reveals that the researchers are really reluctant to open data due to the fear of possibility not receiving credits, or that they fear that they lose possible publication opportunities. Another category deals with facilitating conditions, and here it appears that it's very important for researchers to have a secure infrastructure where they can analyze and store the health-related data which might be sensitive. And so a secure infrastructure brings me to the major goal of SPHN. So SPHN, just as a reminder, this is initiative from the Swiss federal government, namely by the State Secretary of Education, Research and Innovation and the Federal Office of Public Health. And the major goal is, as said, to build a national secure infrastructure in Switzerland. SPHN follows a decentralized approach, so the data remain at the hospital. We have no central data lake. And the aim is to reduce these data silos we are facing to, and to access data in a fairly manner. So we follow the FAIR principles, saying the data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. SPHN is setting up a semantic interoperability strategy so that we aim to use a controlled vocabulary and semantic web. And of course, at the very end, we aim to harmonize the data governance strategy for a responsible use of data. So when we want to use health-related data in a responsible way, we need to consider ethical and legal implications. Since legal requirements based on ethical principles, which are not always understood, we need to promote the awareness to all different stakeholders when we present the ethical vision of SPHN. And also for that reason, the ASE Advisory Group has developed the ethical framework for responsible data processing. And this ethical framework presents you 4 principles, which are the respect for persons, privacy, data fairness, and accountability. So respect for persons means that we need to respect and protect the rights and dignity of individuals. So these are those individuals who are actually providing you with health-related data you are supposed to use in your projects. Privacy is a very important point, since personal information needs to be safeguarded, and to ensure this, we have to establish information security measures. Data fairness and accountability means that we want to make data available to the Swiss research community, and we should ensure that these access requirements are provided in a transparent way. Coming back to the responsible use of data, we need to mention a very crucial point, and this is the information security. And as such, SPHN has established the Biomed IT information security policy. This policy regulates roles and responsibilities of different parties. So we have here an established management, oversight, and audit of information security. And just as a additional information, because I believe it's sometimes not well understood. So what is that Biomed IT network? The Biomed IT network is a service provider and offers a secure IT environment to Swiss researchers when they want to process health-related data. It offers a high-performance computing service within a cloud technology and provides a remote access. This network constitutes of 3 nodes, which you see in the graph. This is the node in Zurich, the node in Basel, and the node in Lausanne. These nodes are connected to Swiss data providers, such as university hospitals, but also already other hospitals in Switzerland and institutions as the ETH. Data is transferred via a secure end-to-end encryption. So this network ensures data protection and data security by design. It has established organizational and technical security measures. And why is that so important? Because if you want to protect sensitive personal data you're using in your project, and you want to be compliant with Swiss law requirements, you need to ensure that you're following certain security measures. So what does it mean? You have to make sure that the transfer of your data from A to B is done in a secure way. You need to make sure that you prevent any breach of data security. You need to make sure that you're able to verify who has accessed data, who has provided changes to data, and you have to make sure that unauthorized persons are not able to access the data or the facilities where data are stored. So now it's not just about IP regulations, publication, governance structures, which need to be covered in legal agreements. It's also about the security measures that need to be incorporated in the legal agreements. And we do that with the minimal security requirements, which are part of the data transfer and use agreement templates we have provided through the SPHN webpage. So now coming to the legal agreements you can find on the SPHN webpage, and which were released last year. And when we talk about legal agreements, we should also consider what else is needed when we conduct a research project in Switzerland, especially for multi-center projects. And this is not just limited to projects in the framework of SPHN. These are general things you need to provide when conducting such a complex research project. So, of course, you need a project plan, and you have to make sure that for the data you're supposed to use, there is patient's consent given, so that you're allowed to use the data in the context you plan. So this might be the general consent, what we heard already today, which allows you the further use of health-related data. You need to have an ethical approval for your research project, or at least a statement if, for example, you're supposed to use only anonymized data. Then we have to have technical security measures. I was just talking about that. And typically, research projects are using de-identified data. So you have data which were pseudonymized, respectively coded. Maybe you might also use identified data. And for that, you should have explicitly an ethical approval to do so. And since a few years, we have, I would say now, really established the need of those legal agreements. I believe many of you are familiar with having a consortium agreement for a multi-center project. But what we have established now is also the data transfer and use agreement, because if you use data in your project, you need to regulate the conditions under which these data are disclosed to other parties. And there are several legal agreements available for research purposes. So as I mentioned, we have the consortium agreement and the data transfer and use agreement, but there is also an agreement you need if you subcontract an external processor for your project, and that is in the framework of SPHN, the Biomedi Network. So for these subcontract processes, you need to have also a processing agreement. Then if we are exchanging samples, you might need a material transfer agreement. And if you are collaborating with a service provider, for example, the Genome Center, which will process your samples, you have to have also a service agreement with them where you identify all the services needed for your projects. But now let's focus on these three agreements. So the consortium agreement, the DTUA and the DTPA, which, by the way, can be downloaded from the SPHN webpage, but also from the Swiss Ethics webpage. So the consortium agreement, as said, most of you know it quite good. This agreement regulates general principles of collaboration. So it regulates general conditions which are important to have between research partners. That can be institutional policies, rules for subcontracting, and of course, general conditions for data usage. But moreover, what we have in these consortium agreements is governance structure. So it is defined how the executive board is built. The financial aspects are regulated here. It's mentioned, for example, how funds are distributed among project partners. Then we have the confidentiality conditions regulated here. For example, how long the information has to be kept confidential. And of course, the intellectual property rights, so namely background and foreground IP. And in the framework of SPHN, we have typically a joint foreground IP. And this means that the contributions to the intellectual property is generated together. And therefore, we have a joint intellectual property regulation. With regard to publications, we can include regulations which tell you under which timelines publications will be provided, or what other rules need to be followed in the research consortia. Involved parties are here the principal investigators, of course, but namely also project partners, home institutions. So you would add here to show that clearly on the front page of this consortium agreement, the hospital names or institutional names. Now, when we are using health-related data in the project, you have to have a data transfer and use agreement, which provides conditions under which data are disclosed to the other parties. So under which condition does the provider provide data to the recipients? In these agreements, all institutions are involved who are using and sharing data. So typically, these are the same institutions which are listed in the consortium agreement. And in the framework of SPHN, the provider and the recipient jointly determine the means of processing. And for that reason, these parties are considered as joint controllers. And in the framework of SPHN, if you would have now using the Biomedi IT network, you would need to regulate the relationship between the controller and the processor, which in that case is the Biomedi IT network. You need to define the data access routes and minimum security requirements. So you need to subcontract Biomedi IT, and you do this by setting up a processing agreement, which will be part of the data transfer and use agreement. So now to show you that a bit in an example, and to show you how I would start when I need to set up a legal agreement. It's very important to define at the beginning the roles of the research partners. This is really essential to understand actually what the parties are doing in the project. And let's assume we have three parties which want to conduct a research project using health-related data. We have two hospitals which are providing data, and we have the university which wants to use the data. But in fact, at the end, for this project, all three parties want to access data and perform together the data analysis. So we say that hospital A and B are providing data, and all three parties will access the data, so they act as a data recipient here. However, they determine together the processing and act here as joint controllers. And I would, as a next step, ask, so where are these data stored? Where do you plan your analysis? And then you might say, well, I'm using the Biomedi IT network where I have a defined project space located on one of the nodes. And this Biomedi IT network is then acting as an external processing, which hosts and is responsible for transferring the data. So for the legal agreement, that means after you have defined these roles, you can start to set up the consortium agreement with an integrated data transfer use agreement and processing agreement. Let me show that in another use case. So where we have 3 Swiss hospitals participating and an institution, I take here the ETH. And in this example, the 3 hospitals are providing data. So we have here the Interdisciplinary, we have the University Hospital of Basel, and we have the University Hospital of Geneva. These 3 hospitals are providing data. And when you use the Biomedi Network, this would mean that in the next step, you would need to define on which node you will have your defined and secure project space. And let's assume here it's the Zurich node. So what happens now is that the hospital will send the data via the other 2 nodes. So these are processes we have established in SPHN. So Interdisciplinary and University Hospital of Basel will send the data via the Basel node to the Zurich node and the allocated project space. Geneva will send the data via Lausanne and ending up on the Zurich node. Now, as said in the previous example, we need to know now who is accessing data. So this is here true for all 4 participants. All 4 want to have access to data and are acting as a data recipients. And since it's an SPHN project, we will say that altogether we'll decide about processing of data and act as joint controllers. For setting up the legal agreement, it means that we need a consortium agreement, which is regulating the general conditions of the project, meaning that the consortium agreement will be about the 4 parties, so that the University Hospital of Basel, the Interdisciplinary, the ETH, and the Hospital of Geneva will be included in the consortium agreement. And for the regulations of transferring and using data, we will incorporate a data transfer and use agreement, which have another included part of the Biomedi Network services, and these are regulated in the processing agreement. As mentioned at the very beginning, I was happy, or I'm still happy to share the future ideas and some planned activities in our group. And so namely, these are training modules we have prepared. These modules contain kind of 3 categories. So the one is for the responsible use of health-related data for research. So here you will find some training how to set up legal agreements for multi-center research studies. And the other module is about fair health-related data for research. Here you find trainings for semantic standards or RDF schema. And then we have the other module for Biomedi IT. And here the focus lies currently on ensuring security measures in research projects. Another point we are working on is that we really want to simplify this contractual architecture. One goal, of course, is to promote further these SPHN legal agreement templates for multi-center projects. We are actually very lucky that we could establish those one already with the Swiss university hospitals, but also with other institutions. But another point we are focusing at the moment is really to simplify the architecture by drafting framework agreements for using the Biomedi Network. So these framework agreements should help us to shorten the contracts and also should help us to finalize legal agreements templates in a timely manner. With regard to the harmonization of governance processes, we think that it's very important really to promote the single entry and exit strategy for data sharing. And we really want to encourage all hospitals that they work on their internal processes, showing in a transparent way how data has to be used and how data has to be shared. So how data can be shared across Switzerland. And another important aspect we need to talk about is how can we use data in the context of a third use. So this is true for data, respectively data sets established through SPHN projects, and we need to elaborate together with the hospitals and together with data protection officers the conditions to make this happen. So from my perspective, if we don't want to lose the trust of patients, we need to keep on investing, ensuring meeting Swiss law requirements, and also ensuring data privacy. And we heard that today at the very beginning, that trust and transparency have a very interesting relationship, and it's not entirely given nor blind. And setting up legal agreements which ensure these requirements will help us to strengthen the trust given by the patients. So what we need is also from the perspective of researchers, really incentives for this responsible data sharing. We need to simplify the administrative processes for such collaborations. And we need to have a sustainable financing for these technical solutions we are building up, so that we might be able to protect and secure data also for future projects. And we need to promote the understanding that healthcare and research has to go hand in hand. Thank you very much for your attention. I would like to thank you for your participation in this symposium, and my group members, and also the legal team of SAP. Thank you very much.